April 21st, 2025. The time is exactly 4:30 p.m. This is an F-16 C Block 50. But it is not just any F-16. It is a Block 50 Plus Predator that destroys Russian war machines every day for the Ukrainian Air Force. In a few moments, it injects engines, and exactly 27 minutes later, it would destroy 3,600 tons of Russian ammunition. What's more, it would destroy them along with a huge Russian drone army. But the mission was very difficult. In Belgorod, a Russian S-300 radar was scanning an area of 300 kilometers. As a first wave, the Russians launched fierce drone attacks on Ukrainian artillery in Sumy and Kharkiv via Belgorod. They also cornered Ukrainian Leopard and Bradley tanks on the border. Ukrainian Gepards hunted Russian drones, while artillery provided support to military units inside Belgorod. However, this was not enough for defense. The F-16s had already been deployed. The Russians were unaware of the F-16's operational readiness. Two tactical F-16 jets equipped with JDAM missiles were waiting for orders to take off hundreds of kilometers away from the front line. Time was of the essence. The target was approximately 370 kilometers away from the Pridneprovsk air base. The F-16s had to reach their target in 27 minutes at the latest. Seconds of delay would mean the destruction of Ukraine's armored convoys. The Russians relied on the S-300 and other dome air defense shields. But what the Russians did not calculate was that the F-16s were also loaded with HARM missiles. AGM-88 HARM missiles can reach twice the speed of sound thanks to their dual-reaction Thiokol solid-fuel rocket engine. High-speed anti-radar missiles are designed to detect the location and type of enemy radar systems and carry out attacks. In other words, one of the F-16s would fire the first missile from a distance of approximately 150 kilometers. This would have disabled Russian air defense systems, including the S-300. The second missile would have been fired just before the F-16s released their payload, ensuring maximum accuracy. The Russians were preparing for a second wave of drone attacks to stop Ukrainian armored vehicles. Based on the preparation time between launches, Ukrainian intelligence calculated that copies of the Iranian-designed Shahed 136 drones would take off in a group between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. The ground control stations for these drones were spread out between an old train station, converted into a munitions depot, and a concrete command building 3 kilometers north of it. This two-pronged risk scenario brought together the F-16 platform and JDAM-ER munitions for a single-purpose mission: disrupt the Russian military's command and supply hub in Belgorod before the drone swarm takes off. Ukrainian forces demanded that both facilities be silenced within the same minute before the drone swarm took off. The structural advantage of the F-16s approaching the target began here. Despite carrying only a single Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW229 engine in its fuselage, the Block 50 Plus model can still reach a top speed of Mach 2. With the afterburner engaged, it accelerates to takeoff thrust of 129 kilonewtons in 3 seconds. When the front wheel lifts off the runway, the aircraft can climb at a rate of 15,000 feet per minute. However, this sortie, which caught the Russians off guard in Belgorod, was not programmed for high-altitude flight, but for maximum speed on the ground. After all preparations were completed, the jets arrived at the runway at Pridneprovsk Air Base in the afternoon. Following the completion of the taxiing procedure, the aircraft began their short takeoff run. At 4:47 p.m., 2 F-16 jets took off from the air base with loud noises. Each jet was carrying 3 GBU-32 JDAM-ER and 1 HARM missiles under its wings. In total, 8 bombs meant 3,000 kilograms of net explosive payload. The body of a single JDAM-ER is of the Blue 110 type, consisting of a 454 kilogram steel concrete penetrator that, when combined with the explosive charge below, forms a high-penetration warhead. In its standard configuration, the bomb glides for 15 to 17 kilometers, but with the ER wing kit added, it can glide up to 28 to 30 kilometers in a glider-like flight. The wing material is carbon composite, resistant to friction, and provides structural flexibility from the moment of launch within a temperature range of 70 to minus 45 degrees Celsius. Therefore, when the F-16 releases the bomb, the munition undergoes a brief free fall, deploys its wings, and glides toward the target while locking onto its axis. In other words, the F-16 jets had begun the operation fully equipped. 30 seconds after takeoff, the pilots entered the nap of the Earth profile. The jets, flying at an altitude of 30 meters above the ground, were approaching the border at a speed of 840 kilometers per hour. At this altitude, the radar horizon barely exceeds 24 kilometers. Even if the S-300V4 battery turned its billboard radar, it would have to wait for the F-16 to rise above the horizon before detecting it. Therefore, the strike aircraft would remain on their own side of the border, while the bombs would enter Russian territory within the range of the wing kits. The plan was simple. First fire, the second harm. Pop-up, release, glide, dive, explosion, turn. The most critical moment was the pop-up toss, the maneuver of rising and launching the bomb. Because the aircraft would become visible on radar for 3 seconds, a timing error would mean that the 9M82M missiles, capable of reaching Mach 7 in 4 to 5 seconds, would launch. When the JDAM GPS OK indicator turned green on the cockpit's multi-function display, the pilots raised the nose by 45 degrees. The two jets climbed to 2,400 meters, and the F-16's fly-by-wire system automatically compensated for the loss of lift during the climb. At the release point, the long-range release indicator lit up on the HDU. The pilots pressed the trigger switch. The internal pylon bombs were released in half a second, and as the tripwire cable of the JDAM bombs broke, the compressed springs on the tail fins opened. Then the external pylon bombs broke away. 6 JDAM bombs separated from the fuselage. The mini-servo flaps on the tail switched to GPS path correction, and the aircraft entered the glide phase with a 40-degree gentle climb. 8 JDAM bombs separated from the fuselage. The mini-servo flaps on the tail switched to GPS path correction, and the aircraft entered the glide phase with a 40-degree gentle climb. The aircraft immediately performed a right-left turn and descended, returning to an altitude of 150 meters and fixing its nose toward the Ukrainian border. They were no longer visible on enemy radar. The first 2 JDAM bombs released in flight were targeting the ammunition depot to the south. During the glide phase, the F-16 jets reached a speed of Mach 0.9, the maximum lift-to-drag ratio achievable by the wings at that speed. The depot roof was newly covered. The JDAM bombs entered at a 35-degree angle. The BLU-110 warhead penetrated the second floor, and the delayed fuse detonated. Pressure inside the enclosed space doubled, triggering the Grad rocket launchers. After the first explosion, the depot's central walls were blown outward. A BMP-2M on the ground was flipped over by the blast wave, and the Nona turret on top tore through the lower plate. The second JDAM bomb targeting the fuel tank on the eastern side deviated 17 meters from its nose guidance, but still penetrated the target tank. The vapor from 10,000 liters of fuel ignited and rose up to 40 meters. The fuel fire combined with oxygen in the air, shrouding the outpost perimeter in a red-black cloud. The other 2 JDAM-ERs locked onto the concrete command block to the north, pierced the roof, and exploded in the server room on the basement floor. The building's GLONASS and radio cables melted, and the control panel caught fire. The shockwave collapsed the shelter ceiling, blocking the exit for those inside. Since these explosions occurred simultaneously, the Tor M2 radar truck, which was not in the target area, lost its command uplink. The last 2 JDAM bombs targeted the UAV Launch Command Center. The explosions triggered a chain reaction, blowing up the command center along with critical equipment inside. In this attack where F-16s virtually leveled Belgorod, it wasn't hard to start counting what had been destroyed in the first 10 minutes. 1,400 Grad rockets, 700 mortar shells, 8 tank trucks, 7 BMP-2Ms, 6 MTLBs, and 2 Nona mortar vehicles. When the unit was accounted for, it was determined that approximately $29 million worth of equipment was rendered unusable. The Tor battery did not enter the loss list as it had not been deployed to the area. No official figures have been released regarding personnel casualties, but estimates suggest that at least 50 people were injured and more than 10 were killed. Let's move on to the cost calculation. Ukraine's expenditures were clear. Each of the 8 JDAM-ER kits cost $170,000. 2 HARM kits cost $570,000. When fuel, maintenance, engine lifespan, and pilot bonuses are added, the cost of 2 F-16 sorties amounts to approximately $150,000. The total operational cost was estimated at around $2 million. The cost-benefit ratio is roughly 1 to 15. This is considered a high return for an F-16 fleet. When the jets returned to Pridniprovsk, it would be accurate to say that the Ukrainian pilots had successfully completed their mission. The engine exhaust temperature needed to drop to approximately 450 degrees, It was standard procedure for the technical team to conduct a quick inspection of the wing panels, engine intakes, and power structure sensors on the fuselage after landing. No damage was found as a result of this process. It was estimated that there was still 900 kilograms of JP-8 fuel remaining in the fuel tanks. The aircraft were deemed ready for duty again after 3 hours of maintenance. The military planners in Belgorod were stunned. The drone swarm couldn't take off. The ground unit was destroyed. The command center collapsed, and the supply line was down for at least 2 days. This disruption would cause an immediate shortage of ammunition and fuel on the Kharkiv front, reducing Russian artillery firepower. For Ukraine, the real value was proving its ability to strike deep with air superiority without crossing the border. When the F-16 platform was combined with JDAM-ER, the resulting range forced the Russians to choose between reinforcing their defenses with concrete or moving their equipment further back. A fixed depot is no longer considered secure because a 450-kilogram bomb can glide in from 25 kilometers away and embed itself inside. The summary table is straightforward. 8 smart bombs, a half-hour flight, $29 million in damage. When the money spent, the blow delivered, and the moral shock created are compared side by side, the concept of small body, big impact in the F-16 era's battlefield equation becomes concrete. When the explosions in Belgorod cease, the Russian border corridor will likely remain quiet for 2 days. At the same time, the people of Kharkiv and Sumy will hear fewer sirens throughout the night, and Russian planners will open the map and mark the range circle of the JDAM-ER with a thicker pen before beginning preparations for a new attack. In other words, following the successful air operation conducted by the F-16 jet, Russian forces are no longer responding to the command code of the 112th Regiment. They may also be abandoning the perimeter, with most vehicles in a disabled state. The repercussions of all this will likely alter the course of the war in a fundamental way. In other words, in this war, borders are as thin as the carbon fiber tip of a JDAM wing kit's micro-servo. When a pilot's thumb touches the button, all the thick lines on the maps turn into smoke trails. Another note in the frontline report is that Russia will think twice before attacking Kharkiv and Sumy, at least until the end of summer. For the F-16 jet has created such a climate of fear in Belgorod that Russian artillery units and drone operators may hesitate to launch attacks on Ukrainian border towns. So the psychological emphasis is also important. If you ask Russian infantry on the front lines, the fear of silent air bombardment is a whole new dimension beyond traditional artillery fire. This shadow threat is a ghost that keeps the sentry awake. After the Belgorod explosion, the number of open radio connections at border outposts likely decreased until backup systems were established. When piston truck convoys move forward in radio silence, coordination errors increase. The lesson learned for Ukraine from the operation is this: even with the stay-in-your-own airspace tactic, the F-16 can paralyze the rear of the front lines. The Russians must now scan and hide a 50-kilometer buffer zone on their maps as high risk. Every concrete building in this area is effectively uninsured. And no matter how deep you bury it, the 454-kilogram BLU-110 bomb penetrated 1.2 meters, detonated with a 0.2-second delay, and collapsed the ceiling. To use thicker concrete, you will need river sand, cement, labor, and time. In war, time is the enemy. The final picture shows that the JDAM-ER threat has dealt a blow to Russian logistics' short-range rapid deployment reflexes. Thank you for watching.